Hi there, folks. So, what happens when you are looking for an ancestor in the census and they just cannot be found? We know that they should be there. We know their age. We might know where they were born. Might know where they were living at a particular time. But for some reason, we just cannot find them. Many years ago, when I was tracing my own family tree, I had this problem with my maternal grandfather. I never knew my grandfather because he was quite old when he had my mother. The marriage was a second marriage, quite late in life. He was 59, 60 when he had my mother, and he'd had a previous marriage. And my mother was born in 1924. So he was actually a real Victorian. He was born in 1865. So we knew his name. We knew that he'd lived in Manchester for much of his life until he and my grandmother moved to the Isle of Man with their two young daughters, my mother and my Aunt Dorothy. So it should have been easy to find him, but for one or two things, and those are the few things that I'm going to really look at today. This video really points out the importance of several things to bear in mind when you are tracing ancestors in the census. First of all, it emphasizes the importance of talking to family members, older family members, while they are still with us. Secondly, although older family members might give us some information and clues, we do also have to remember that their memories may not be completely accurate. So we have to sort of work around that to a certain extent. Thirdly, this involves the not uncommon practice of children being fostered out. In the 19th century, early 20th century, this was fairly common when perhaps the child was illegitimate, or the parents died very young, or they just could not afford to look after some of the younger children. So when children were fostered out, they very often took on the name of the foster family. That can cause a lot of problems when you're tracing ancestry if you have no idea of the family they were fostered to. And lastly, another thing this video will point out is the problems of bad spellings or spelling errors in the census. So, how did I get around all that? So my grandfather's name was Francis Manley. That was the name we always knew that he had. He was married to my grandmother with that name. And sorry, I've got my little dog on my lap. That's why you can see a bit of fur. Say hello, Tilly. Yeah. And when I was searching for him, it was before the 1911 census. So this is, as you can tell, it's some time ago. I think I'd found him in the 1901 census with his previous marriage. I hadn't been able to find him in the earlier census records. I had searched and searched and searched all different spellings of Manley, but absolutely nothing came up. Then one day, I think my Auntie Dorothy had come to stay with us, and we were chatting about the family history. And my Auntie Dorothy suddenly mentioned that she thought that their father had at one point been fostered. And she remembered that the name of the foster family was McEwen. That's what she thought. That was all she could think of. Great. So I thought, well, maybe I can find him with that name. So let's have a look, see what happened. So let me just show you first of all how I started to try and find Francis Manley. I'd already found him in later censuses, but I wanted to go back further, obviously, to find his original family, his parents. And I've not been able to find a baptism. So his name, as we knew it, was Francis Manley. And we knew he'd been born around about 1866 and that he was born in Manchester. And he lived in Manchester. So let me just show you what came up. We've got a Francis C. Manley from Hull living in Devon. No. Devon. No. And nothing else. Absolutely nothing that looked like, and there's various spellings. That, of course, that's a female Frances. One should always look at those, of course, in case they're wrongly spelled. But all those other details just did not look right, and there was nothing else for Manchester. I searched various ways, spellings, wide birth date range, etc., etc. Absolutely nothing came up. So it was at this point that I had a conversation with my aunt that revealed that he had once been fostered out to a McEwen family. So I thought, well, maybe he was living under that name. So I tried McEwen. Now, there are very different spellings of McEwen, but look at what came up. 1881 census, born about 1866, born in Ardwick, Manchester, and living in Openshaw. Let's have a look. Now, if we go down here, we find Francis McEwen. The household he is living in is described as brother, but look at the name of the head of household, John Manley, iron forgeman. So what was going on here? John Manley was married to Margaret Ann, and they had children, and they had these two at the bottom here, Francis McEwen and Mary Jane McEwen, brother and sister. Now, this Francis McEwen was a cart boy, and later on in life, my grandfather was working for the Great Western Railway Company, and as a clerk. He was a goods clerk. Cart boy really fits into that. And of course, he's living in the household of Manley, so this really fits. So I thought, hang on, what's going on here? If we've always known him as Francis Manley, how come he is here Francis McEwen and the brother of John Manley? Now, don't forget that sometimes relationships in the census can be a little inaccurate. In fact, this should say brother-in-law. So remember that, because that relationships column, sometimes the enumerators made mistakes. They didn't quite get it quite right. And sometimes if you have, say, a lodger, the children of that lodger will be described as son, rather than their relationship to the actual head of household, which is what they should be. So the relationship, I finally realised that the relationship Francis McEwen has to John Manley is brother-in-law. So it is Margaret Ann who is his sister. And I discovered this by going back to the 1871 census and looking for the same one. Let's just do that. So, Francis McEwen. So I really wanted to try and find him with his parents. But again, I hit a problem because nothing that seemed right came up. No Francis McEwens born or living in Manchester. So I tried, Let's try going back to Manly again. Burnley, Lancashire. No, that wasn't right. No, nothing came up. So at that point, I tried lots of different, I don't want to bore you too much by going through all the different searches I made. I did try various spellings of McEwen because there are many ways you can spell that name. There's all kinds of interesting spellings, and there's McGowan with G's and MC's and MAC's, etc. But what I did once, when I really just still could not find him, I finally did this little trick that I do. I tried first of all looking for a Francis without that surname and with the exact name, which sometimes can help, but again, nothing else. Francis Markey, maybe I probably looked at that. It could be similar to Manly, but that didn't look right either, so I tried the other way round. Look for McEwen. Now, I didn't really want to click on exact for McEwen because there are so many different spellings, so I left that like that. I just thought, I wonder what will come up here. No, nothing there. So by this time I'd come across quite a lot of different spellings, so I tried various ways of searching. I tried McGowan. Let's see. Nope, nothing coming up there that looked right. And finally I went to this wildcard thing where you can put in an asterisk to fill in wildcard letters in between. So I tried MC ending in N. Nothing there. Another spelling was McCowan. I tried that. And we've got Thomas, John, Joseph. Oh, wait a minute. Look, right here. A strange forename, phrases. Born Openshaw. Wait a minute. And let's have a look. So if we have a look at this, we can see now, if we go down to this name, it's not just a transcription error, it's actually written in the census as phrases, Francis without the N. That was the reason why I had so much difficulty finding him, even after I had found his original name. And here he is the son of John McCowan and Jane. And when I looked for other children of John and Jane McCowan, I found that they had their eldest daughter was Margaret Ann, and she, of course, was then the wife of John Manley. And we can also see here the youngest daughter, Mary Jane, who we can see living with their sister Margaret and John Manley in the 1881 census. So what had happened was that my grandfather had not been born as Francis Manley. He had been born as Francis McEwen. And I found John and Jane sadly both died, one after the other. This was a terrible time in Manchester's history. The pollution in Manchester was so bad at this time. Many people died of respiratory diseases, and I found that they both died of pneumonia when my grandfather was just 8. And obviously what happened is that he and his younger sister, Mary Jane, went to live with his older sister. So there you go. Just goes to show not only is it important to get information as much as you can from your family, but also knowing that your family can make mistakes, that people were fostered out, and that spelling problems can be the reason why people don't turn up in the census. Also, for research purposes, sometimes it is a very good idea to look at the possibility of people living with siblings, other family members, etc. So there you go. That's eventually, after long, long years of searching, that is eventually how I found my grandfather. So there we are. You can see all the different bits of problems that could have stopped me from finding my grandfather if it hadn't been for my Auntie Dorothy remembering that name, having the idea that he'd been fostered, which was true, but she'd kind of got it the other way around. He hadn't been born Manly and fostered out to the McEwens. He'd been born a McEwen, and he had been fostered by his brother-in-law and his older sister. That my aunt had had no idea about. She had just heard the name, probably from their mother, saying, oh yes, you know, he had the name McEwen at some point. So it shows that although family members might have some knowledge, they don't always get it quite right. So you have to kind of use what they say, the clues, rather than absolute information. And remember that if you can't find somebody in the census, could it be possible that they were fostered out as children? And remember also that although the websites like Ancestry and Find My Past, you can search for somebody with a surname without having an exact spelling, doesn't always mean that the name is going to come up if it's been very badly spelled. So you need to remember that too, and do that thing where you look for the surname without the forename and vice versa where necessary. So these are some things you might want to bear in mind if you cannot find your ancestor in the census. And of course, that all happened quite a long time ago. And I'm very, very glad that I managed to speak to my aunt at that time, because she then, just as my mother did, she developed dementia, and they're both gone now. And if I hadn't had that conversation with my aunt, I would never have found my grandfather, and I would never have been able to trace his ancestors, who turned out to be very interesting indeed. The maternal side of his family turned out to have come from a big family in America who had been early settlers. They were mariners and shipbuilders, and one of that family was one of the people who built the famous American warship, the USS Constitution. And one of those people came over to England in about 1830 and married and had my grandfather's mother. So if I had not got that bit of information from my aunt, I would never have known all that interesting information. So the thing is, just keep trying, keep asking questions of your family, and just keep thinking what might have happened. Why might somebody be under a different name? Could there be a really bad spelling error? All those things. Keep persevering, and you never know, you might be able to eventually track down that ancestor and then continue to follow their line. So I hope that's been useful to you, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.